Our guests today are Aleks Melnikova and Stephen Tomlinson. They're both the co-founders of the design consultancy Cosmic Velocity, both based in the UK. A warm welcome to both of you, Aleks and Stephen. Are you here with us?
Thank you, Ake. Pleasure to be here today.
Very nice to meet you. Pleasure to be here.
Great. It's nice to have you. See you back again. And I look forward to your presentation and to hearing more about your product. So please take it away. The screen is yours now.
Great. Okay, so I'll start us off. So as Ake said, my name is Aleks. I'm one of the co-founders of a design studio called Cosmic Velocity from London. And I'll tell you a little bit about us just before we dive into the world of heat pumps and the solution that we have helped create. We are a product design studio. What that means is we design inclusive and successful products and services for different companies. And those companies tend to be, as in this case, could be startups, but could also be other tech companies that produce software. So that is our interest and kind of our passion in that space. We also not only design products, we train and design teams to help different organizations build capability. So we believe in design sort of as a set of methods, as well as what you're about to see, which is prototypes, journeys, deliverables, and everything else like that. We have had very busy 2 years. We have been running for now 2.5 years, actually. So we have worked with a lot of organizations. We have kind of looked at different projects for a variety of areas, such as education and transport and travel and real estate. Basically, both me and Stephen and the team at Cosmic are real believers that cross-pollination of ideas is something that really brings innovation into the product space. And that's why we look at a lot of complexity across different domains. We helped startups close their funding rounds. We designed teams. In essence, it's quite a vast things that we have done so far. And those are some of the clients we worked with. And we will tell you about one of them, which is Spruce. I will not dwell on that too much. But I will let Stephen dive straight in and tell you about all about the Spruce project and the problem that it solves.
So before I talk about the work and go through some of the, the sort of UX flows and the product, I'd like to just set a little bit of context and talk about heat pumps. So those of you in Europe might be a little bit more familiar with a heat pump. Many people in Britain don't really know what a heat pump is. Have never really seen one. And that's because the prevalence of heat pumps in the UK is pretty low. And that fundamentally is the problem that Spruce is trying to solve. A heat pump works much like an air conditioner. It uses refrigerant to capture some heat from the outside of the property, and then use that to heat a hot water circuit to heat your radiators or emitters, possibly your underfloor heating if you've got that, and your hot water for your bathrooms. It's much more efficient than using a boiler. And crucially, it runs on electricity, so it can be powered entirely by renewables. Heat pumps are critical to Britain's plans to reduce its carbon footprint. And over the next decade, the carbon footprint of housing in the UK needs to fall by about 40%. Now, the UK government set the ambitious target of increasing heat pump installs to 600,000 per year. This is their target. This is a target they set for 2028, which obviously we're only a few years away from now. Now, the good news is heat pump installs in the UK are going up considerably year on year. But the bad news is that they're still miles away from the target. And one of the key reasons why this is such a problem in the UK is we have very old housing stock, some of the oldest housing stock in Europe. British people like to refit their homes and sort of endlessly, adapt them rather than kind of build that many new homes. And that means to get enough heat pumps into the UK market, we need to do a lot of retrofits, taking older properties that have a gas boiler and switching them out to a heat pump. And you can see here the sort of age of properties in the UK relative to many other countries in Europe. France, incidentally, has about 20% of their homes heated by heat pumps. Britain is currently about 2%. So it's not entirely down to the age of the properties, but the age of the properties certainly makes it a lot more complex. So why aren't more heat pumps installed in the UK? So this is because it's just very difficult. 1.7 million boilers are replaced every year in the UK, gas boilers. When your boiler breaks, you need a new heating system in a hurry if it's the middle of winter. It currently takes about 3 months to install a heat pump, which means that as a distressed purchase, you can't easily switch to a heat pump from a gas boiler. And so what people do is they buy another gas boiler. So huge missed opportunity there. Affordability is high. It's a challenge because heat pumps, a bit of a capital expense up front. So if we can make it quicker and easier to install a heat pump, we can lower the price point. And also there's labour shortage. A lot of heating engineers, because there's so little prevalence of heat pumps in the UK market, and because it's quite complex to switch from gas systems to heat pump systems, there's just not enough installers in the UK market putting heat pumps into homes. And therefore we want to make it quicker to put heat pumps into homes. We want to make it cheaper and simpler for installers and people who are interested in renewables to fit these systems. And we want to increase the amount of installers and companies doing this in the UK market. And that's what Spruce has set out to do. And that's what we as a design agency have partnered with them to help on. So that just sets a little bit of context of what we're trying to do. Now, when Spruce came to us, they had a product that helped installers with the first part of their journey, which is to create an estimate for somebody who wants a heat pump system. So you're thinking about a heat pump, you're maybe doing some renovations on your house, and then you start shopping around for quotes. Now, at this point, you're getting estimates from different installers. So Spruce originally had a product that would look up some details about your property. So fortunately in the UK, there's this government database of properties, and it has sort of the energy rating of your property. A bit of pseudoscience involved in coming up with the energy rating, but nevertheless, it has lots of details about the property, which is super helpful. So Spruce's product will go and look up that data, confirm some of the details with you, and then be able to generate an estimate off the back of that. So we took this sort of technical feasibility prototype, and we sort of expanded the question set a little bit to make sure that we covered all the things you need for an estimate, and we made it into a sort of smoother UX flow. So you can see you fill in details of your property, we look up the details, and all we're really asking end customers to do here is just confirm that the details are correct. We should already know how many rooms you have in your property, how many bathrooms you have a sense of what kind of insulation and stuff you have there. And the reason we need to know these things about the property is to fit a heat pump in a home, you need to know how much heat the home needs. So if it's a 5-bedroom house, it's going to need to heat more radiators than if it's a 2-bedroom house. If it's got 3 bathrooms, there's obviously more hot water needed. But you also need to understand the fabric of the property. And so once people have filled in this Q&A, the installers, the people who are going to install your heat pump system, they can look over all the details and make sure they've got a good understanding of how your house has been put together. They can override or change any of those details. So if you put that you've got double glazing, but they look at some photos on Google Map or they had a call, or they came to your property and they thought, I think that's pretty sure that's single glazed windows, they can update that, change it. And this is crucial because we need to understand how much of the heat generated in your home is going to be lost through the fabric and materials of the home. A better insulated home obviously requires a smaller heat pump to power. Once we'd sort of redesigned the estimate flow, we then moved on to surveys. So I said earlier that a lot of the housing stock in the UK is quite old, and that means we're doing retrofits a lot of the time. So installers are going into your house and they're trying to understand, okay, how's this place put together? Is it actually double glazing or single glazing? And then, how am I going to size the heat pump and install the system and replace the gas boiler? Part of this is driven by the UK's government's grant. So there's a government grant scheme where the government will give you some money off a heat pump install to try and incentivize you to do it. The slight problem with this grant scheme is that in order to ensure that they're giving the money to the right people, they've added a whole bunch of different requirements which are quite onerous for when you do the surveys. So what we did is we spent a lot of time with installers visiting people's homes and understanding what it is that they need to understand to size and properly design a heat pump system. They go around your house and they understand all of the emitters, radiators, and heating sources that you have. They take a lot of measurements of those as well. They want to know exactly what radiators, or RADs as the installers will call them, are. They use a laser measure to measure all the dimensions of the property. So when you're installing a heat pump, you need to know the entire internal volume of the house, which basically means you need to know the internal dimensions of every single room. I've got a laser measure somewhere around here as well, so we sort of bought and familiarized ourselves with most of the kit. They need to understand things like the electrics and the water systems, so that we can understand how we're going to sort of drain water from the system, and whether you've got enough capacity in your home for the electrics. This is a process that used to take quite a long time. Sometimes you'd have to come back to the property if you didn't do it right as well. So what's absolutely essential for installers is to visit the properties as little as, as much as they need, as little as they can get away with. But it also created loads of paperwork and effort afterwards. So installers visit homes, they write down loads of dimensions and details on a piece of paper or into a notebook, and then they come back to their office and they fill in lots of spreadsheets like this one. These allow you to size the heat pump, do all the sort of mechanical engineering calculations that you need to do for your heating system. But what we heard from installers is it takes many hours to fill in these spreadsheets, and it creates a lot of work. And you can be super busy doing loads and loads of installs or site visits, and you can get a bit of a backlog build up of proposals that you haven't got out to customers because of this. So we built and designed with Spruce an application to go around the property and do capture all of this survey data. Now, an early decision that we had to make as a product team was, do we actually create a floor plan? And that's because you're trying to capture all the dimensions of the property and the internal surfaces, as well as what all of the external walls are made out of, how big every window is, what kind of external doors you have. And all the while you're talking to the customer's following around the house. They're saying, oh, how many radiators am I going to have to change if I install this heat pump system? And do you think I should put it outside the kitchen, or should I put it at the end of the garden? You're discussing where you might put the water cylinder. So there's a lot of backwards and forwards with the customer. And at this point, you're starting to think about the end system and the design, but you're also trying to capture the data and the requirements for that design at the same time. So the benefit of doing that within Spruce is that you can get immediate feedback as you're putting in the dimensions of the property, as you're adding the radiators that the customer currently has. You can start to see really key information, like you can see the heat loss and a breakdown of what the insulation is doing within the property. Now, prototyping this and designing this was quite difficult. You've got a 2D canvas with a floor plan, so we had to work very closely with an engineering team. A lot of this was about information architecture problems, trying to understand how we're going to navigate around all the different objects and elements within a home, moving between rooms, floors, walls, windows, and then capturing details, properties, and photos of all of those different things at the same time. We would make sort of simple Figma prototypes of some of the sort of panels and slide outs, but ultimately we would have to build all this stuff quite quickly and iterate because it's very difficult to prototype. And I would say that the key thing about the survey process and this floor planning sort of tool that we built, it's not so much about reducing the time of the survey itself, although we have improved that. It's more that when people go back to the office, they don't then need to do this giant design task. The design is almost instantaneous as a result of capturing all the right data during the survey process. Having tackled estimation and survey and design, we then moved on to the sort of broader end-to-end job. And that's because we were starting to piece together the entire sort of customer journey for installers. and the entire kind of sales funnel all the way to delivery. And increasingly, they were asking for CRM-like features. They wanted to manage the whole job in the tool. So the tool allows installers to manage lots of different jobs and quickly see the status of all those jobs. And it allows them to take a job all the way through from estimation, survey, design, creating a proposal for the customer, getting them to agree to that and sort of sign off the paperwork, and then ultimately through to commissioning and paperwork for the installed system. So we designed a customer proposal portal for the customers to come in and see the job spec that the installer is sending you. This allows you to see the quotes, the breakdown of the design system. Because we've done a floor plan, it allows you to see all of the rooms in your property laid out exactly as they are in your home and labeled exactly as they are in your home. And this presents incredibly professional proposals to customers. And then finally, we had, by this point, built so much product and learned so much about the product that we helped Spruce to design the website and marketing for this product, talking installers through all the different features and functionality and helping them to sell Spruce. We started working with Spruce at the end of 2023, when the product was very nascent. We've worked with Spruce since, and most of this work that I'm showing you today comprises about a year's work. So we went from 0 to quite far very quickly. Spruce now has a growing customer base, hugely successful customer retention as well, and continued growth. So that's a sort of snapshot and overview of the product itself and what we designed. I'd also like to just talk through, along with Aleks, some of the sort of takeaways and learnings, and I guess Cosmic's point of view on designing products. So one of the things that we think is absolutely critical and that Spruce does such a good job of is having a continuous conversation with your customers. A startup really is just understanding our customers and relentlessly solving their problems. Now, Spruce are fantastic at having really, really good relations with their customer base, with their installers. And we have a sort of group of installers that we speak to very regularly and can jump on a call with at any moment, as well as a sort of wider group of installers that we test with regularly and use for things like usability testing or going on installs that I showed you earlier. Spruce has also been really good at building up a sort of library of insights from this. So we've set up a Notion database, logging all of our calls and interactions, not just usability testing or user research calls, but bug fix calls, onboarding, potential new customers, everyone that we speak to. In all of those calls, people start giving you feedback, ideas, explaining some of their use cases. So over time, this is built up into a super valuable database. We also have sort of product features and backlogs based on this, and we're constantly updating those and keeping them current. We've also basically gone to where people are. So for a lot of installers, the easiest way to communicate with them is through tools like WhatsApp. So there's loads and loads of WhatsApp channels and groups we have with installers where we're getting constant and continuous feedback and can put ideas in front of them. Over time, as I said, this builds up a sort of a huge library of insights. So increasingly, we've been using AI tools to analyze that, things like Notebook LM, which is super helpful for focused usability testing or discovery sprints, as well as doing some sort of meta-analysis, looking back over the database and all the insights over time. As well as this sort of constant dialogue with customers, it's absolutely important to know when to go a bit deeper and do discovery research. So ethnography, like the install visits I talked about, making sure that you take time to get out of the building and really understand the workflow and the job. When you're designing B2B tools, you basically are designing a huge part of someone's job and their day-to-day work. So ultimately, you always need to understand the context of use and how they go about their job at the moment. and making sure that you take time to sort of tell stories with that, and and do the deep analysis to make sure that you sort of build pictures and insights from that research. We've also, this is quite a complex technical product to build, so lots of discussions with engineering team and the fantastic developers that Spruce have to understand some of the constraints that we're going to work with. Building a 2D drawing canvas tool and a floor plan is quite complex, and some things have to wait till later. Also understanding the data model. So we're building quite a complex kind of back end to this product, understanding, things like customer proposals, whether they're signed or not by the customer, whether they've been seen or not by the customer, whether we've sent them to the customer. I'm just trying to understand how all the different parts of the system are going to be managed by the installers. So people have their own kit lists and their own equipment, and the installers want to spend a lot of time setting that stuff up and setting up all their pricing, and then using that as part of the design. So there's lots of conversations about the data model and the sort of architecture of the product. And Cosmic are very, very tech-focused design agency, and so for us, we think this is a critical part of building it out. We've also made sure there's good alignment between the design system as represented in Figma and on the front end. Ultimately, a design system is a code product, and where possible, we've always aligned things like properties with the sort of React components. We've also tried to ensure that design tokens flow nicely into the front end. So Spruce using Tailwind, like many development teams at the moment. And so we've ensured that the tokens and systems we set up in Figma flow neatly into those variables. I'm now going to hand over to Aleks to complete some of our process.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen talked about sort of design, and I want to mention design from a slightly different perspective. We felt like as a part of this project and a part of a lot of work we do, it was very important to sort of design the project itself. So fostering true transparency is another kind of principle that we carried out of this work. So it's all about designing the project flow to make collaboration natural, to make sure that a lot of tools and systems support that collaboration between the partners that we are, so the agency and the startup. So there are quite a few things in terms of systems that we used. We always had an open FigJam space with thinking and dates. This is where we would plan the project. This is also where we would throw ideas. We have an open Figma with design progress. So at any point, all of the team members can just see the work kind of happening in progress. There was no grand reveal at any point of this project and this program of work that we're doing. We have Slack groups, both for us together and separately, to make sure that we support each other. Projects within complex technical domain require a lot of thinking and sometimes a lot of reset and a lot of kind of quiet work, but also working together. And all these things were some things that we consciously designed and brought into this project. As Stephen mentioned, we obviously had WhatsApp as well for like really quick questions and communicating to installers who spend their days basically outside of the digital space. In terms of the step-to-step things, we varied this work in meeting face-to-face from time to time and kind of collaborating, making these workshops or a day out to work on things, into focused work, into kind of working in person, and then designing a check-in rhythm. I know a lot of product kind of studios adopted the daily kind of stand-up rhythm. Sometimes it didn't work for us. Sometimes we were varying those things to ensure that we have enough time to do focused work on each side, the engineering, the design, and then come together and kind of discuss progress and design together again. So the takeaway from this is it's about flexibility, but it's also about conscious design of the project itself, of the collaboration. And the other principle we felt was very important is building knowledge together. So there came a natural moment in which Spruce needed to hire designers, which we have helped with as well. And in order to be able to to do that, we're very interested in using design on products, but we're also interested in using design as a methodology, as a toolkit to kind of create change. So as a part of this process, we needed to go through a collaboration together as a team to understand, like, what does good portfolio look like? Me and Stephen have about 20 years each of experience in design. And also in hiring, because we led teams before starting Cosmic. And so a very good process for us together with Spruce was to look at what kind of designer do they need, as you can see in here, what exactly the good portfolio looks like for this particular engagement and for the work that is needed further. And that's from kind of a hiring and growth perspective, so supporting each other there. And then from the other perspective, equally designing kind of the processes for longevity. So looking at how we structure the file, as Stephen mentioned, to make sure that the development is easier and always accessible and so on. So for us, in a way, it's beyond the product into the space where we are growing together, and we're encouraging kind of startup growth and supporting that growth in all the stages that it goes through as a design partner. So for us, it's very much not about just creating product. It's about creating relationships, understanding and capabilities beyond kind of the system that we're designing into the future and into much, much more product. Product is never done. It's never really. And as we're speaking, there are more new developments and new features and new things that are coming. And we're very excited to keep supporting Spruce on that journey. It's really not about us, it's about them. It's about the very, very smart team that we got to work with, and we're very grateful for the opportunity that they provided us. So for every one of them, for Nick, for Joe, for Ralph, for Dan, for Steph, and for Josh, we are very, very pleased that this work got recognized, and we're very happy to be working with such a smart bunch of people. And that is it from us, I believe, Stephen, unless we have anything else to... No, that's it. That's the last image. Very suitingly. Let's start it with people, end it with people. That's the main thing.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aleks and Stephen. Maybe you can stop the presentation now so people see you. And well, thanks a lot for sharing not just like a walkthrough through the product and the development process, but above all, I loved how you put together your findings from the processes and your takeouts about what works and how things work. And above all, I love your kind of customer relations building approach and keeping in touch with customers. So thank you for this very, very nice presentation and for sharing these insights. And to all of you out there on LinkedIn, please bring in your questions now into the comments if you've got questions to ask to Aleks and Stephen about this product. And well, actually, I was wondering. So you framed this the space and the situation, the market pretty well up front. But I'm just wondering, what else? Which other tools are there, and what are they missing? So what did you focus on with Spruce as a let's say like a key functionality, if you can pin one?
Well, there's a lot of tools out there in the UK to tackle other aspects of renewables, things like sort of solar panels and batteries and things like that. The reason Spruce started with heat pumps is because heat pumps is the most underserved part of the market and the hardest problem to solve, because you're essentially replacing the entire heating system for a property, whereas if you're putting a solar panel array on the roof, it's actually got like quite a simple problem in a sense. You put the array on the roof, squeeze as many panels on, wire it into the property, whereas the heat pump system is just fundamentally a lot more complex. So there are a few other sort of competitors in the market trying to do the same sort of thing, but they're all tackling different aspects of it. So I think for Spruce and us, one of the key things is trying to build out the entire customer workflow. Trying to avoid the phrase all in one or end to end, but you try and be quite focused on a particular part of the journey, and the installers love it, and they're like, okay, great, can you also now solve this part of the customer journey for me? So, you know, the product's very much grown into this kind of complete end-to-end system.
Aleks, anything to add on this?
No, I think as Stephen mentioned, but on one hand, it's end-to-end. On the other hand, it's kind of tackling as we were going through, so the survey, as through different parts of the functionality and focusing on it and working through it with customers. So I don't think I have anything to add in terms of focus, but I really like how the user journey kind of is coming together now, that every part gets its definition bit by bit, more and more.
Yeah, and I think once you've solved some of the kind of the functional problems of the tool, and then you start to bring more people onto a B2B product, what starts to, you know, ideally all of the market's using your product, or enough of the market is using your product. So then for the installers, it's like, okay, so what's the competitive advantage for me using this versus somebody else? So customizability has been, you know, quite key all the way through. Things like the proposals, you can brand them and sort of rearrange them and choose which bits to show and how to present it to the customer. And increasingly, we're sort of finding ways that installers want to do things differently to other installers and making sure that the system supports that. But all the while, as a UX designer, you're always trying to avoid adding too much complexity. Too many settings or preferences can make the tool very hard to use.
So what was the most time-consuming part in this whole platform and app that you designed?
Do you mean in using it, or do you mean in the sort of workflow of an installer?
No, in terms of
for us
designing and development.
Designing it. Yeah, I mean, I think the ensuring consistency in the design system. So we have an Android app, an iOS app, a mobile kind of PWA, progressive web app. A lot of people are using it on desktop. There's the customer proposal, which is kind of like a different front end, estimates that get sent to the customer, which is like a different front end to the logged in installer platform. Then there's like an embed that goes onto installers' websites as well. So there's kind of like quite a lot of different surfaces, and kind of you thinking about those all as sort of a continuum of different products that kind of link together as the platform. So ensuring that they all had a consistent design language, and that it feels consistent, even though they're kind of solving different problems, I'd say is probably the biggest challenge, because you're trying to very quickly get features and functionality out to installers and get feedback on them, but all the time you're trying to make sure it's coherent. So we definitely had to go back and rethink some things. As Aleks said, you never finish software, like it's always a constant process of iteration. And definitely working out some of the sort of data models and the underlying structure as well has been a real challenge to make sure that it's scalable and then we're not boxing ourselves in.
So technically, I get this absolutely, and getting things right, but within the functionality, let's say the workflow for the installers, when you're focusing on let's say maybe research, designing, and then getting part of the application done, what was the biggest challenge there from your point of view as a design agency?
Yeah. I think designing the floor planning tool was definitely the hardest bit, because it's just very difficult to prototype that sort of stuff. You have to prototype in code and build a lot of it, and then do constant usability testing on it. And yeah, putting it aside enough time to do that was definitely a big challenge. We flexed our team up and down depending on the kind of the needs of the project and what we were focusing on at a time. So the user research that I showed earlier, you know, obviously we scaled up the team to go and do all the installs. Different members of the team went to installs, versus when we're just doing kind of feature work and more UI. But I'd say definitely the most complex, most challenging thing to design was the floor plan, and really getting that right and usability testing that really.
Yeah, I feel one of the fun parts was definitely going to the visits with installers and feeling like an apprentice, asking a lot of questions, shadowing, understanding their interaction with a house owner and things like that, and kind of seeing how they use the tools. That was a lot of fun. Then collecting all the data, obviously, kind of into the journey, understanding what kind of software would really serve them. that's a really satisfying part. And then, as Stephen is saying, floor plans, the complexity of it is not just one level, right? There are houses are a couple of stories, rooms are amended in different ways in the UK, and the way of doing it on mobile, like if small screen and so on, and understanding how the floor plan actually should work. Like I do remember we had quite a few moments where there is even sort of personal disagreement of like, this is how I see this working versus this is how I feel this should work based on some interaction. And that was the complex part, really complex part.
Just to stick with a floor plan for a second, it looks like it's basically being built based on measurements and then typed into the phone. Were there other approaches that you were thinking on that might be a bit more quicker or more intuitive to use? I don't know, image recognition using like the phone's camera, and why didn't you pursue this?
So we did. So the options are essentially, yeah, as you say, type in. You can plot a room on the floor plan, so you can sort of draw the corners. So if you've done a few other rooms and you've got to fill a gap, so you want to put a hallway in or a sort of interior room, we can just fill that space and estimate, get the measurements inferred from the other rooms. You can draw a room, so you can just draw the points, and then we'll draw the room, and you can sort of move